So um, this is not necessarily a slam dunk argument from Mackie. There's a few responses that we can give to try and limit the force of this argument. So one example, one example of a response might be that even though there is some disagreement, there's still significant moral agreement in our intuitions over basic moral principles. So if you were to poll all the people who exist in the world, it seems like the vast majority of them are going to agree on a large part of what the set of moral beliefs that are ideal ought to be. So, for example, all cultures are going to have some strong norm against killing innocent people. For example, I mean this might seem basic, but basic moral principles like don't harm others unnecessarily, do us to others as you'd like to be done to yourself. These kind of basic reciprocal moral principles are things that we still have significant agreements over. Um, and so even if there might be some disagreement in moral intuitions, it seems like that's not enough to say that we should chuck out all of our moral intuitions. Maybe we can trust those ones that there is still significant agreement over. Um, a second potential response here is that we might argue that people's differences in opinion are going to be explained by what's called descriptive disagreement rather than normative disagreement. So the line of response here is that ethical judgments are made up of both descriptive components, so components about how the world works, and then normative components, which is components about how the world should work. So whenever I say that something should happen, I'm relying on a certain set of descriptive facts as well. So, for example, if we wanted to consider two people who had different intuitions about whether it's permissible to eat meat, um, one thing that could be happening here is that they both actually agree on the ethical principle that we should not, significantly harm animals unnecessarily. They might disagree on, whether killing animals causes them significant harm, or they might disagree on what counts as unnecessarily. They might think that meat has certain health benefits that you can't access through other diets. So these wouldn't be actually disagreeing about moral facts. These would be disagreeing about facts about the way that the world works. And so some people who are more optimistic about our intuitions might want to argue that even if it looks like there's disagreement amongst our intuitions, these aren't actually moral disagreements. These are disagreements about other kinds of facts. And if everybody were to have access to the same kinds of facts, our intuitions would fall into line with one another. Okay, and then finally, the last possible response that we could consider here is that the extent of disagreement is exaggerated because people like to focus on the most difficult cases, right? So when we're philosophers, we like to think about those ethical problems that we don't really have good answers to so far. And so, we've already talked about the trolley problem in previous lecture, and that's something that it seems to be very difficult, seems to be very intractable, something that we can't get um, clear answers on based on those two cases, which is pulling the lever and throwing the fat man. And even if we can't get a good agreement on what our intuitions ought to be on these cases or in other difficult philosophical cases, maybe it can be enough that people agree that certain cases are tricky, even if they disagree about what the conclusion ought to be, because this suggests that our intuitions might be reliable at determining what kinds of phenomena in the world are ethically important. So suffering, happiness, life, number, etc., etc. All of these things, freedom, autonomy, etc. Our intuitions are very good at realizing that these are ethically important, but people might have different intuitions about how to weight them. And so, again, this is another of the kind of tactic of trying to undermine the extent of disagreement that's present amongst our intuitions and trying to weaken the force of this argument. And to support this point, there's a quote from Wittgenstein here that's quite nice, where he says that a main cause of philosophical disease is an unbalanced diet. One nourishes one's thinking with only one kind of example. And the idea here that he's trying to get at is that if you only use certain kinds of examples, so in this case, examples of really difficult moral problems, then you might, miss the forest for the trees. It might lead us to the false conclusion that there is a lot more moral disagreement than there actually is in the world. So I'm going to leave it to you guys to determine what you think about this argument from disagreement. But so the main challenge here is that disagreement in our intuitions suggests that they are unreliable because we can't tell from our own internal perspective whether our intuitions are tracking onto the world or the kind of ethical truth of the matter, or whether they're simply reflecting back at us some irrelevant facts about our culture.